What's up everyone, welcome back to another episode of Rad Dad Builds. So today I'm going to be showing you how I built this modern trellis with hanging planter boxes, and I'm stoked how it turned out, so let's get into it. So for the material on this project, to kind of match previous projects that I've done in the past, I'm going to be using clear cedar. See, clear cedar is just like regular cedar, but it has little to no knots, and usually it has a bit of a tighter grain. But it is a premium product and it does come with a bit of a price. To save a bit of money, you could just use regular cedar, which will have a few knots in it. Or to save even more money, you could just use the lumber that you get from Home Depot, like fir, spruce, or pine, because we are staining it, so it is going to be somewhat protected. But for the long run, long term, cedar would probably be the better option, or something that's more weather resistant. So for a 5-foot wide trellis and 4 to 5 different size planters, I've calculated I need about 10 2x4s at 10 feet in length, and about 4 to 5 1x8s at about 10 feet in length also. So now the material's covered, it's now time to get into the building of the trellis. So I'm going to put my least 2 favorite 2x4s out of my pile aside, because they're going to act as my support pieces. I'm going to stain them black so they look like somewhat of a shadow. And with the remaining 2x4s, I'm going to cut them dead in half with my miter saw, which will leave me with a bunch of 5-foot long pieces, which is the width of my trellis. So now that these are all cut in half, it's now time to rip each one into 3 1-inch strips on my table saw. Okay, so now that we got a whole bunch of these 1-inch strips cut, I'm going to set them aside for now and dig out the 2x4s that we put aside earlier and get those going. So these are what the slats are going to get attached to, and then these themselves are going to get attached to the studs on the wall where the whole thing is going to be going. So I ripped them down slightly so they don't seem as chunky and as bold, and I'm going to stain them black so that they somewhat disappear in behind and look like somewhat of a shadow. Okay, so while the stain on this is drying, we're gonna set them aside again and make a start on the planters. So for the planter boxes themselves, I'm gonna be making them out of 1x8 cedar. And I made this guy earlier, and I'm gonna make a few more like it at 3 feet wide, 2 feet wide, and 1 feet wide. So we have a variety of sizes hanging up on the trellis there. I also, with the ends, I cut at 7.5 inches wide at the bottom with a 5-degree angle either side. So that way the planter boxes are leaning forward on the trellis, so you get a better idea of what's inside. I also cut the bottom of it at 7.5 inches wide so that a 1x8 will fit nice and snug in the inside at the bottom, creating less work and less cuts and making this whole project a lot easier to do. So that's enough talking, enough chit chat. Let's get into making the rest of these planter boxes. Yeah. Alright, so that's the planters pretty much wrapped up for now. So when I was assembling them, I glued each seam and I pinned each piece together using stainless steel pins. If you don't have a brad nailer, that's fine, you could always screw them. And I recommend using these lost head deck screws. They're great for exterior work and they have such a tiny head, so you don't really notice them too much. I went ahead and drilled some drainage holes in each one so that when the soil's in there and they're being watered, any excess water can escape and stop things from rotting out. And I also sealed the inside with some exterior grade polyurethane just to help prolong and protect the whole inside, because obviously there's a lot of moisture there. So I'm going to put these aside for now until we come to sand the whole thing, and we're going to make a start on the trellis. So I went outside to where the trellis is going and I measured the distance between the studs exactly where this is going to be hung on the wall. And then I set my 2 dark stained pieces that same distance apart so that I know that these can be attached to the studs and I don't have to worry about it falling off. Now that my support pieces are equal distances apart, I can start screwing my slats down to the support pieces using a 1-inch wide piece of scrap wood as a spacer, so that way I can keep a nice consistent gap all the way up. And the lines stay nice and straight. Alright, so I'm pretty happy how this whole thing is coming together. It's looking dope. So I went ahead and I sanded everything with 120 grit sandpaper. I also broke away any of the sharp edges so there's no splinters and stuff like that, and it also gives the whole thing just a cleaner look. So to attach the actual planter boxes to the trellis while it's hanging on the wall, I ripped down a bunch of 1-inch strips, as we know that that's the size of the gaps on the trellis. I then went ahead and glued and screwed the 1-inch strips to the back of each planter box, 1.5 inches down from the top. That way I can locate the 1-inch strips in the gaps of the trellis and then add a couple of screws through the top of the planter box into the trellis, holding the whole thing into place and not worrying about it falling off and making a big mess. Now it's time for the most satisfying part, which is to add some color and some protection. So for the stain on this project, I'm going to be using Benjamin Moore's Arborcoat in Natural. It's a really good exterior stain. It's perfect for this kind of project, and I love the colors, especially on cedar. It just makes everything pop. I'll also be using a Benjamin Moore Arborcoat clear coat just for an added bit of protection. It's not going to get that much wear and tear, but with the moisture and all that kind of stuff, I just wanted to get as much protection on this as possible. So usually when I come to stain something like this, I'd have to get a real small brush and try and get in all these little edges and stuff like that, and it's really tedious. But fortunately for me, I'm lucky enough to team up with my good friends at Wagner, and they were cool enough to send me out one of their sprayers. Yeah! So Wagner were cool enough to send me out their Flexio 4000, and I've used it a few times and I love it. It's great for all your residential painting needs because it comes with the turbine, the hose, and the 2 different nozzles to suit pretty much most painting at your home. Like staining decks, staining fences, painting the exterior house, painting the interior house like your walls, your trim, doors and stuff like that, even fine furniture. So I'm pretty stoked on this, and I'm excited to get this thing stained up. So let's get it outside and let's get going. Yeah! Alright, so I've left this dry now for a good few hours, and this here is the reason why I love the combination of the stain and the clear cedar, because it just looks so good. All the different color variants just pop, and I'm really happy with this whole thing. So all that's really left is to attach the trellis to the wall by screwing it into the studs, and then attaching the planter boxes to the trellis wherever I want them to go, and then obviously adding some flowers. Is it kind of big? Okay. There we go.
In this video, this is how you get your dirt on your floor.